From 2006 until 2015, this retro dining table and 6 chairs was where we ate, talked, and congregated. But after 9 years and 2 young boys, the table, and especially the chairs, had seen some serious action, and it was time to retire them. It was out with the old and in with the, older, actually. We replaced the table and chairs with this restaurant booth, and the old table and chairs went into storage until this past Thanksgiving, when we had 23 people coming for dinner, and we were suddenly, and for the first time in our lives, faced with a dearth of usable chairs. It was time to tag the old dining chairs back into action, though they had seen better days. They were still structurally sound, they just needed a little sprucing up. So a little sprucing up is what they got. This is how we did it. Obviously, the first thing we need to do is break down the chair. There are 4 screws in the back and 4 in the seat. I'll reuse the screws when I put the chairs back together, so I put them in a magnetic dish so they won't get lost between now and then. The next step is the most tedious part of the whole process. We have to remove the staples so we can remove the old material intact because we'll use it as a template for the new material. A staple remover, like this one, is one of those luxury items that you can get by without, but will instantly become a necessity that you can't live without once you have one. We didn't have one on this project, so we just used a screwdriver and pliers. They work fine, but they're no staple remover. As I said before, we're going to use the old material as a template to lay out the new material. But before we can do that, we need to separate the vinyl pieces. A seam ripper is usually the best way to cut through old stitching, but sometimes scissors are what you need to get the job done. Bonnie is using scissors here because she broke all of her seam rippers earlier on this project. The thicker upholstery thread in chairs like these can be tougher to cut through, so plan accordingly. We're going to reuse the foam in the seat back, so we'll have to cut the stitching in each one of these vertical lines. The cord in the welting on our chairs is plastic, so we can reuse it. In older chairs, it was made of cotton and may not be salvageable depending on the condition of the chair. We'll set it aside for now. While Bonnie is busy deconstructing the vinyl, I'll start cleaning the metal chair frames. Most of the rust is on the surface and can be removed easily enough. I'm using Barkeeper's Friend and a wet sponge to get the bulk of the rust off. After a thorough rinse, I go over the whole chair with Neverdull. Neverdull will remove some light rust, but mostly it polishes and protects the chrome. Then I wipe everything down with a clean towel. I could try to remove all of the rust from the crannies, but all of this will be covered with the seat, so it's hardly worth the time and effort. I was slightly overzealous with the Barkeeper's Friend and removed the chrome here, so you can learn from my mistake if you're so inclined. Meanwhile, Bonnie has all of the vinyl pieces separated, so she can begin laying out patterns for the new material. Laying each piece of the old material onto butcher paper, she traces around the outside of the material with a pencil. Then she makes notes about size, orientation, and cuts. Otherwise, things will get confusing when she goes to transfer her templates to the new vinyl later. When tracing the old material, she makes the template slightly larger than the material to allow for the movement of the vinyl when the chair is reassembled.
I did 1/2 inch seam versus 1/4 inch seam for the front and the back. I want to be able to have the front be more forgiving because you push into the front a lot. Where there's going to be a lot of movement, like in the top of the seat and the front of the top of the chair, I always give a little more seam so that it doesn't pull out. So same with the seat, I want to do a thicker seam on the seat because it squishes so much with the force of people sitting. I'm tracing it bigger around the outside so I can give myself a 1/2 inch seam. Since this has been curved around the chair so much, I'm going to use this straight edge because I know this is a straight edge, whereas I'm not going to be able to get this straight because the chairs were rounded for so many years. So the only edge I really need is this top and the length.
She does the same thing with the welting. She uses the old material to get the measurements she needs, and then she uses a straight edge to create the template because the old welting is too damaged to lay flat and straight enough to make a proper template. With the old material traced onto the butcher paper, notes and measurements made, she can cut out her templates. Next, she rolls out the new vinyl face down so she can begin to lay out her patterns by tracing the paper templates onto the vinyl with a charcoal pencil. She traces the old material from the chair back directly onto the new vinyl though.
So I need the curvature at the top. The really important thing is the curvature of the corners up here. So that's why I put the extra length down here, because then I can fold it over. But I still want the curvature here. I'll leave these until I'm done sewing, and then I'll snip those off.
All of the patterns are on the new vinyl now, and they all fit, which means we measured properly. So now it's time to cut them out. And once that's done, we can start sewing. Bonnie begins by stapling the foam to the front seat back panel. This holds everything together as she passes it through the sewing machine. She uses the lines in the foam as her guide. This creates straight lines down the front of the panel that will keep the material tight to the chair back. Without it, there would be a gap between the foam and the vinyl, and it would puff up and look sloppy, like your mom. She repeats this process for all of the stitching lines, and then, when the front panel is secured to the foam, she removes the staples. Next up is the welting. She starts by wrapping the cord with the vinyl and pinning it with a couple of pins towards the end. She sews everything inside out, so the pieces need to be laid out accordingly. The welting will be folded over when she attaches the back panel, so we need to pin it with the open side facing out like this. Care must be taken as she sews the welting to the front panel, so as not to sew the edge of the foam to the vinyl. She only pins it with a couple of pins at this point because the welting needs to stretch as she goes around the corner. She goes slow, ensuring everything stays lined up and the piping stays inside. Now she can attach the back panel. She starts by pinning it at the bottom two corners and the center of the top seam.
This is just holding it in place because it's got a curve. It's curving in now because of the piping and the way the seat goes. So I'm trying to hold it in place.
You can see why she prefers the stapler to pins. These pins keep the back panel from moving off center as she sews around the edge. The hard part here is staying straight as she moves down the seam. The welting creates a little ridge that she has to balance on. If she falls off the ridge, the seam won't be straight. There's room for error though, because all of this stitching will be hidden.
Every time I fall off this bump, it's so hard to get back onto this piping.
Now she goes around the whole thing once more, following the welting to tighten up the seam. She makes minor cuts in the vinyl along the curved portions without cutting into the stitching. This makes the material more willing to bend when turned right side out. The seat is a very similar process. She starts with the welting, and because the seam can't be hidden, does her best to make it as even as possible at the back of the panel. Then she will go all the way around and attach the ends in the middle. Sometimes the way the material is cut can cause the piece to stretch more to one side than the other, and so you end up with more welting material at one end than the other. So she makes sure the cord does not come to the end of the vinyl. And just like before, she places the welting with the opening facing out and pins it. Because she's going to overlap the two ends of the welting, she starts the locking stitch about 1.5 inches from the end. She lines up the edges of the pieces and moves along the edge of the cord like so.
And I avoid pinning on this material because it leaves holes. This is not like a self-healing material where the hole closes and you don't see it. It's not forgiving. So I try to pin as little as possible. It'd go a lot faster if I could pin it, but...
You pin your back.
Yeah, because those were all hidden. And I don't have as much, give in the seat as I do on the back, because it all folds in together.
Before she gets to the end, she cuts away the excess cord and then folds one end of the welting into itself and lays the other end on top. Then she staples the seam to hold it together while she sews it. She doesn't stitch the end of the box in because she's going to fold it over like she did the welting. Now she folds over one end of the boxing and staples it. Then she lays the other end over the folded end and pins it before finishing the seam. Finally, she removes the pin and goes around the whole piece once more to tighten up the seam. With the sewing done, we're ready to cover the seat and back. Working in small sections, Bonnie staples the vinyl to the seat bottom. Then she pulls the material tight from the other side and staples it. She works her way around the whole seat, pulling and stapling until no slack is left. Then she cuts out the excess material and tacks down the loose bits. The back is attached the same way as the seat. She starts by pulling the back panel tight and stapling it down. Next, she cuts the excess material from the back panel, folds over the front panel, and staples it to the edge of the back panel. The only thing left to do is put the chair back together. The seat is straightforward. I just have to put the 4 screws back in their respective holes. The back, though, is a little more complicated with the vinyl covering the screw holes in the wood. It's easy to feel the impressions left in the foam from being screwed to the chair frame, so I feel along those indentations until I find the 4 puckered screw holes. Then, using an ice pick, I poke a hole in the vinyl over the screw hole. I repeat this process on 1 hole on the opposite side. Now I can start the first screw, but I don't tighten it down all the way. I insert the second screw and tighten it down. Then I move back to the first screw and tighten it all the way down. Now I can use the ice pick to easily start the other 2 holes and install the 2 screws. That's all there is to it. These chairs are finished and ready for use. If you found this video helpful, or even if you didn't, click the subscribe and like buttons. Be sure to read the description for a list of frequently asked questions. There are also links in the description to the tools and materials we used on these chairs, and a link to a video on my other channel about how to clean and care for vinyl. So if you decide to undertake a project like this yourself, you'll be able to make your work last a lifetime. If you have any questions about any part of this process, feel free to leave them in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them. And thanks for taking the time to watch our video.